I think we're live, so I shall begin. Hello everyone, I'm so pleased you've joined me again for another instalment of the Adventures of Edward Beetroot. I hope you're all keeping well and finding lots of fun things to do. My sister Maria has been busy writing for us again and even drawing a picture of Edward Beetroot. So get yourself comfortable and I will begin. Edward Beetroot, Chapter 3, Clean Up on R3. Henry and Edward Beetroot sat on the end of Henry's bed one mild Saturday morning in May. "So, Henry, where is it exactly you go shopping?" asked Henry's large, round, talking ginger tomcat, Edward Beetroot. "Well, it depends on what we're shopping for," replied Henry. "Why the sudden interest?" Henry looked quizzical. Now then," declared Edward. "I have noticed that the lady of the house has recently stopped giving me cream and started to feed me its poor cousin milk." He shrugged. "It's not even full fat. Plus, she's definitely cut down on my rations. Are we at war, Henry?" What Edward didn't know was that Henry's mum had decided to put Edward Beetroot on a diet. She had noticed that Edward's legs had all but disappeared under his body, and the only war that was going on was a battle to change Edward's diet to one bereft of chocolate hobnobs. "Well, Mum's doing a supermarket shop today, so I could ask her to get you some treats." Edward moved his whiskers with a large padded paw and considered carefully. "That's all well and good, Henry, but I simply don't trust the woman. I don't think she has my interest at heart. I think you should go with her, Henry, and what's more, I think I should come along." Henry had been put in this kind of predicament on many occasions, and he despaired. Edward always landed him in a lot of trouble when he had one of his so-called good ideas, and that they were always nearly turned bad. Now, you know what I'm going to say, Beetroot. I don't think that is wise. Cats aren't even allowed in supermarkets, let alone to shop. Edward was outraged. "Oh, nonsense, absolute nonsense. What do you take me for, Henry? Do you consider me some backstreet alley cat? I know perfectly how well to conduct myself in public." Henry knew he was fighting a losing battle. "But, Edward, the supermarket manager might see you and throw you out, and I'm sure you wouldn't like that." "I would like to see him try," retorted Edward. "I would certainly give him a piece of my mind. Discrimination is what it is. Do you know, back in Egyptian times, we cats were regarded as gods. Yes, Henry, gods. But if it makes you feel any better, I will ride in your rucksack." Henry put his hands over his eyes and shook his head. Edward rarely gave in, but this time Henry knew he would have to stay firm. "Edward, I'm going to have to put my foot down this time. You can't come." Edward was not amused at all, and if one thing Edward Beetroot was good at doing, it was sulking. He turned his back to Henry, ruffled the fur on his back indignantly, lifted his bushy tail, and showed Henry his bum, as if to say, "Take that." Henry was quick to leave the room, and Edward to his bad mood. A few hours later, after a lazy morning of watching his television, it was time to go shopping. Henry decided he would go with his mum, so that at least he might persuade her to get some cream, so as to cheer up his furry friend. He proceeded upstairs to tell Edward he was off, and found him splayed, feet up in the air, paw across his forehead, and wailing, "Wow, wow, wow," and moaning. "They treat me like a servant round here. They hardly feed me. It's no good. I shall have to run away. I shall be gone by the morrow, never to be seen again. Good-bye, dear Henry." Henry looked at Edward. He did look genuinely upset, and he didn't like to see his lovable Ginger Amiga like that. He also didn't like the idea that he might not see his lovable companion again. Edward whined pitifully, "Meow, meow," until Henry could take no more. "I suppose if you promised to stay in the rucksack you could come, but you would have to promise," said Henry. With that, Edward instantly cheered up, leapt to his feet, and launched himself from the bed and straight into Henry's open rucksack. "Oh, you have my word, dear boy. I will be invisible. You won't even know I'm here." Henry doubted that very much. His back would certainly know it as he hoisted his rucksack containing Edward's cumbersome frame into position. Henry's mum met him at the bottom of the stairs. "My goodness, Henry, what have you got in there? You're only going to the supermarket." Henry didn't like telling lies to his mum. It wasn't even a small white lie, but a whopping great ginger one. Just a coat and some wellies in case the weather changes, Mum." She shrugged. "Well, okay, let's go." And with that, Henry, his mum, and his large ginger tomcat headed out to the car. The journey was uneventful, as Edward promised not to make a sound. In fact, Henry assumed Edward had fallen asleep. 10 minutes later, when Henry's mum pulled up at the supermarket and parked in a bay, she grabbed a trolley whilst Henry lugged the weighty rucksack out of the back seat. "Henry, you could leave that in the car. It looks heavy," his mum observed. "It's okay, Mum. I like to carry it round." And so they headed into the supermarket goodbye. "Are you okay, Edward?" Henry whispered as they entered the store. Two orange ears, a pair of large green eyes, and some furry whiskers appeared out of the top of the rucksack. "I'm here, Henry. Oh, my goodness, just look at this place. I have never seen so much food in my life." Edward's hiding place afforded him a view of the aisles. Shelves piled high with packets of cereal and bread, and further along the row, rows and rows of biscuits. Edward whispered urgently in Henry's ear, "Henry, Henry, you simply must pick me up a couple of packets of those chocolate hobnobs, and this time keep them out of reach of that Whittaker fellow." Edward had had a bit of a run-in with one of the neighbours, who he had accused of stealing his hobnobs. Edward had to go behind enemy lines to reclaim them, much to the alarm of the old man. "Okay, I'll ask Mum." And that, dear readers, is where Henry made his second mistake, the first bringing Edward Beetroot in the first place. Rather than bring Edward along to catch up with his mum, Henry placed the rucksack on the floor at this point, as he was getting rather a burden to carry him around. Edward, being Edward, and the fact that he was surrounded by shelf upon shelf of delicious goodies, just could not help himself but leave his cover of the rucksack to explore further. Edward was under the impression that as a cat he was sleek and stealth-like, but that was not the case, as we well know. As a rather cuddly character, Edward was not easily concealed amongst the aisles of good buys. However, what Edward lacked in nimbleness and agility, he made up for in determination and cunning. So he pulled out a few loaves of bread from the bottom racking and curled his ample body in the space it created. When the aisle was clear of people, he snuck from his hiding hole to check out the goods on display, and maybe just sample a few as a means of quality control. Henry had still yet to return by the time Edward had trotted up the aisle and turned the corner. And My, oh my! As he did, a heavenly view of cream came into sight. It had been 2 whole days since Edward had sampled its deliciousness, and he would not be able to control the urge just to have a mere sip. All Edward had to do was to leap up and catch the handle of the chiller cabinet, scale a couple of shelves, and grab the pot of cream. Edward wasn't very good at leaping, but the cream was incentive enough to at least try. On attempting, Edward was way short of the handle, but his claws were able to grip on the rubber inner lining of the chiller door, and he was able to commando style his way to reach it. As his paw caught the handle, the door swung open with Edward hanging on for dear life. "Whoa!" Edward proclaimed, hanging precariously. He dropped back to the floor and proceeded to launch himself onto the shelves to reach the shelves a little further up where the cream lay in wait. It was okay at first. The weighty containers of milk meant it could accommodate Edward. However, as he eventually heaved himself up onto the ledge of the shelf holding the cream, the shelf tipped, and this is where it all went horribly wrong. There was an almighty crash as the shelvings gave way under Edward's hefty weight, and Edward found himself on the floor, surrounded by spilt cartons of cream. It might have been his idea of heaven if it weren't for the fact Edward did recognise he may have caused a bit of trouble. Up in the supermarket office at Goodbyes, the supermarket manager, Mr. Hargreaves, was surveying the shop floor when he came across the image of what appeared to be a humongous orange cat in the chiller cabinet. Not only was this a serious breach of food hygiene, but he also appeared to have caused a substantial amount of damage. There was split and spilt cartons of cream splattered everywhere. Mr. Hargreaves was beyond livid. His cheeks took on a shade of crimson. You could imagine steam coming out of his ears. He picked up the towel and announced in a loud, sharp tone, "Assistant required in aisle 3. I repeat, could an available member of staff please assist in aisle 3? Clean up is required immediately." Now Edward knew he was in trouble. He so wanted to stay to help with the clean-up of the cream. After all, it was no job for his belly, but he thought he'd better scarf her. Not only was an assistant about to attend the scene, but also on his way was a very angry Mr. Hargreaves. And that is where we're going to leave it tonight. So if you want to find out what happens next, come back next Wednesday and see if Edward does get to sample any of that delicious cream, or ends up being put on a diet for the rest of his life. Before I say goodnight, I want to remind you that you are safe and loved. Air hugs and lots of kisses. Night night. See you on Sunday.